Okay, it's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker as we move, as I told you, from our story. And we're road mapping our story so that we can see where we've been today. We've discussed overview with Sir Martin Sorrell. It pays to be paranoid. I love that line. And now we're moving into the next piece, which is culture. Jeff Jarvis is the author of What Would Google Do?, the ebook Gutenberg the Geek, and the best-selling and controversial Public Parts, where he aims to defend society's move to public displays of personal information in an age of the internet, social media, and blogging. Jeff says that people should embrace what he calls publicness rather than fear the internet and its potential erosion of privacy. Jeff directs the Town Knight Center for Entrepreneurial Journalism at the City University of New York Graduate School of Journalism. He's also the co-host of the podcast This Week in Google. Jeff was president of Advance.net, the online arm of Advance Publications. He's the creator of Entertainment Weekly. He was the TV critic of TV Guide and People magazines and Sunday editor of the New York Daily News. He consults for various media companies and startups. He's exceptionally cool, and it's my pleasure to welcome Jeff Jarvis.
If I ever want to invade a country, that's the general. She got all of you to obey. That's phenomenal. Guten Morgen. Great to be here in Vienna. Sorry I have to dash, but my funder has a meeting tomorrow in New York, and so one says yes and goes. So Gutenberg. I became obsessed with Gutenberg in writing Public Parts, and that's why I wrote the ebook Gutenberg the Geek, arguing that Gutenberg was the first technology entrepreneur. Longer story, it costs only 99 cents. You can go get it on Amazon. But it's important, I think, to bring up Gutenberg in this audience, because, in this room, because it's a tale of change and disruption in the world. And Gutenberg in Mainz invented the press in 1450. It took 50 years for the book to take on its own form, a full half a century before the book moved past its scribal roots. Gutenberg's original fonts were meant to mimic the scribe's handwriting. Printing was called automated handwriting. We see the future in the analog of the past. Elizabeth Eisenstein, who's the key scholar of Gutenberg, says it took a full century, 100 years, for the impact of the press, of the book, to be known in society. I'm reading a not too scintillating book right now about the history of newspapers, because that's what I do, which says that, and I just realized, it finally hit me, that the first newspaper was not invented until 150 years after the press. Now, in hindsight, of course, we think that this would have been so obvious. I have this press thing. I can share knowledge with people. Why don't I do that? And I'll make a business out of it. 150 years. All of which is to say that we don't know WTF the internet is yet. We don't have the faintest idea what the net is yet. We are still seeing it in the analog of the past. We still see it as a medium, and it's not. It's a place where people gather and connect and do things and have conversations. And so we don't know how to use it yet. We don't know what to do about it yet. Now, I tend to work in newspapers more than broadcast from my old days, when I had a career. And we've seen a wave of desperation hit newspapers for some of the reasons Sir Martin mentioned and others. And so there's been some effort at innovation there. I would propose to you all that you also don't have any idea what TV is yet. You're babies compared to print. And there's still a huge opportunity for innovation and reinvention to go on. And the internet is going to force you to do that. And I think that what we see in television oftentimes, and in broadcast, but more television than radio, I think, is an orthodoxy that has taken hold. This is how we do things. At the City University of New York, where I teach entrepreneurial journalism to prove it's not an oxymoron, we are trying to rethink what we mean by teaching broadcast. And we're talking about visual journalism now. So I know that you're more than journalism, you're entertainment as well, and we conflate the two in my field in journalism too much. But what I want to argue today is that we have to rethink what television is. So I'm going to give you a hodgepodge of some of the ideas that I've been thinking about in this. I'd like to have some time to discuss and hear what your ideas are. And I don't want to start with the idea of, well, in the US, part of the problem is, and being in a European audience, I'm sorry to use American references, but I guess I should for a few reasons. First, I apologize for the NSA. I'm very sorry about that. Second, in the US, TV, though bigger, sucks more in a lot of ways, right? Local TV news sucks. CNN about MH370 has been just awful, but I'm not going to concentrate on that. I'm going to try to go to the good here. And I think we should look at what TV does well. I think we should look at what TV is more broadly. I talk to people who do web video, and they say, don't call it television. Because to them, television is a word that has cooties, as we said when I was a kid. And I say, wrong. Take over the word television. Reinvent television. I'm an odd American in many ways. I actually watch Eurovision on my screen, and the Europeans can't understand why I'm tweeting about this strange thing. Conchita who? I also, the other day, turned on my stream and I watched the Deutsche Web Video Prize. And I just want to mention that the first winner of an award there was an entity called Bullshit TV. This is not your father's Channel 1. Right? TV is already being reinvented all around you, and I think that you have to rethink what TV can be, going beyond the mere definitions of a screen. So what does TV do well? I want to catalog those things and hear what you think as well. But I think TV does a lot of things well. It entertains, it explains, it summarizes, it witnesses, it convenes, which is a very important power of it. It demonstrates, it educates, it gives voice to people. It doesn't give enough voice to people, I would say. Recently, when Jeff Zucker fired or canceled Piers Morgan's show on CNN, and you can think of that whatever you want to, but he said that there weren't enough people to interview. How appalling that was to say, that there aren't enough voices in the world because we all go to the same few voices. How ridiculous, and how tunnel visioned that is. So we have to rethink TV. In my thinking about media these days, especially, again, I'm a journalism professor and I worry about the business of journalism. And I'm sorry, by the way, I pace to get more miles on my wrist thing. I can't help it. They told me to stay between the white lines, so I'm like a caged tiger. I get to go to here and to here. I may come out here a little bit, sorry. I've been putting my thinking around three things: new relationships, new forms, and new business models for news and media. And relationships, I think we get past this idea of a mass medium. And I know it was said this morning in your opening introduction and welcome that you as public broadcasters see this opportunity to convene everyone into a common shared experience, but I will dare to disagree with that vision of what media and television are. I think the idea of mass media is a very brief blip in our history. The notion of a mass is a brief blip in our history caused by media. As Raymond Williams, the sociologist, says, there are no masses, only ways to see people as masses. So I think we've got to get to a world where we see people as individuals and as communities, and even television, which would seem to be technologically incapable of doing that, is now made capable of doing that with the net. So new relationships. This matters so much to us at CUNY, we're looking to start a new degree in what we call social journalism, the study and practice of engaged communities. To start with the community, not with our content. Indeed, I would argue in news, it is a mistake to think that we are in the content business. We should be in the service business. Content fills things, services accomplish things. They accomplish things for individuals and communities to make life a better place. So if even television can start to get to know people as individuals and as communities, what does that look like? So I want to look at the new relationship with the public, new relationships in the ecosystem around you, and new forms. And I'm going to give you a hodgepodge of some ideas that I've been thinking about, but I would very much like to hear yours, and Amy's going to be my clock bearer here. And I'll be fine at the airport, I hope, as long as the weather cooperates. So first is this idea of the end of mass. To me, that's the most daring thing you can do, is move past this idea that you are the grand shared experience, the monolithic institutional gathering point of everybody. I don't think that's the case. Look at what Martin Sorrell said. Worldwide becomes bigger and local becomes bigger. Regional nations, I think, become smaller in a lot of ways. We have communities that we define ourselves with, and we can now do that across any field. So what does it look like if you have television, if you have broadcast, if you have these other media rethought for individuals? What does it look like if you value yourself on service and relevance? Favorite example of this. Google, big, monolithic Google, and you'll hear from them later, from a friend of mine at Google later, but obviously I'm a Google fanboy because I wrote What Would Google Do? Second plug of the talk. I carry a Nexus 5, a Nexus 7, and a Chromebook Pixel. I live La Vida Google. I don't fear Google, I make transactions with Google. And one transaction is that I use Waze every day for traffic because traffic in New Jersey really sucks. And as a result, Google knows where I live and where I work. And as a result of that, when I go in and I go to Google Now, it will tell me how long it takes me to get home, or how long it takes me to get to work, or when I ought to leave for a meeting, because it knows where I am, and I like that. Thank you, Google. I'm happy with that. My German friends have problems with Datenschutz about that, but I'm okay with that. Now, the result is that Google intuits where I live and where I work. Google, gigantic, huge, monolithic, you're all scared of it. Google knows me as a person. Media outlets don't. My local newspaper does not know where I live and where I work. Certainly my local television stations don't know where I live and where I work. That's sinful. That's ridiculous. So if you knew tiny bits about me, where would you go? I worked with some newspapers that what's so crazy with SEO and social, they gathered huge amounts of traffic from outside their markets, and I had them calculate the value of an out-of-market user versus an in-market user. In-market, or obviously they have ad sales, out-of-market they don't. And the difference was 20 to 25 times multiple. So if we just start with, forget big data, if we started with small data that we knew about people, if we knew where you lived, if we knew where you worked, what greater relevance and service could we give you? If we knew what community you're a part of, if we knew what industry you worked in, if we knew what your job description was, just little bits of data about people. They're not data, they're just things you know. If I know Amy and I know that she was just in Poland, that's not data, that's just something I know, and it's okay. Next, TV has always been good, radio has always been very good at being a witness. But the problem, of course, is that you had to wait until the cameras got there and the full crew and all this big Megillah that you've got and a specialized person, and I'm driving you crazy right now, sorry about that. Well, now, of course, you all know, everybody has a sat truck in their pocket. How can we expand that? How can we really rethink what it looks like? Now, yes, I know somebody here was telling me earlier that doing a study for the Columbia, raise your hand, Sam. So way back there. So Sam's doing a study for Columbia where we looked at what we horribly call UCG, or UGC, user-generated content. We got to come up with a better name for that. And yes, that's being used in broadcast, but we haven't really embraced it beyond the idea of, uh-oh, we got to get film. How do we embrace this idea that we can be anywhere on Earth now? There's a wonderful woman on Google+. Yes, I use Google+ too, and I like it. It's not a ghost town. Report that back to headquarters that I said that. There's a woman named M. Monica there who's disabled, and she can't travel very well. And she's had people through Google+ and through their phones. One is a guy on a canoe out in the wilderness, and she can direct him and say, no, turn right, I want to see what's over there. Right? That idea of being able to get out and get around and use these as a way to connect with the world. Next. I've long wanted to bring in more voices into broadcast, more voices of our communities and our nations. Back to Jeff Zucker saying there aren't enough of them, bullshit. There are. Years ago, I used to work for TV Guide, and TV Guide was owned by News Corp. I'm sorry about that too. And I was having lunch with an old boss of mine there, and this newfangled thing called the webcam had just come out. And I said to my old friend, I said, Fox News, the genius of Fox News is not political or certainly aesthetic. It is economic. It's a lot cheaper to have conversation. But the weakness of Fox News is they have to wait for the judge to get his ass in the studio when the news breaks so they can talk with him. And I know this because I used to work a block away from Fox News, and they would have me come in. When they had their first choice come in, they'd give me the bum's rush and get me out of there. So I said, why don't you have webcams in the judge's office and home and just call on him? Why don't you have webcams with lots of people? And she said, you want to talk to the vice president of being a vice president of things? And he said, oh, no, this would never work. The back hall is not, no, it's not good enough. It's not good enough for us. And of course, it wasn't much later that we saw Oliver North in Iraq with a sat phone and a horrible, horrible, shaky image. We haven't embraced that idea yet either. I have a vision for a show that is a big screen, and it's an American reference again, but does the Brady Bunch mean anything to all of you? So you have a grid across the screen, and you have faces in there through cams, and below them you have their Twitter feed. You know what they're saying. And then you have the host here able to have a conversation with people here. It could be a panel of old people talking about changes in pensioners' laws. It could be a panel of young people talking about culture. It could be anybody from out there in the world. It could also be not just the people that we select, but people the audience selects because they can see who's really good on Twitter. And then what we have is not the horrible next, you've each got 30 seconds. What we have maybe is a conversation that gets somewhere because technology will allow us to do that. I want to make that show. Next, based on Eurovision and such, I think television can be online a tremendous talent scout to find people to do new things in new ways. You already have that in this mass era of let's have these gigantic national and international competitions. But I also think that there's a way to imagine that, and I'll come back to it more in a minute, to really support creation of all sorts. So I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Have you ever heard of Tim Pool? Tim Pool is a young man who made his name broadcasting from his iPhone Occupy Wall Street for 22 hours straight. And I had young Tim, who now works for Vice. Everybody wants to be like Vice now, right? So Tim was there. I had him in my office, and I sat him down and I said, what does the future of TV look like? And he went up to the whiteboard. I love whiteboards. And he started drawing something that had a little bit like my Brady Bunch thing, but he went beyond that. Because he had social feeds of what people were talking about, who's a witness in the field, what's going on, chances for people to have conversations, pull in a witness video from all around. And at the end, yeah, by the way, there was a video feed. But the video was a byproduct of the social experience. What does social television really, really look like? What does it look like when your relationship with your public is conversation and video happens to be a product, audio happens to be a product of that. And it goes beyond talk radio. It's always been the justification for interactivity in media. Well, we have letters to the editor, we have talk radio, allowing 6 people a day to have their say. There's got to be new ways to get in more voices. Mobile. A lot of talk about mobile. Should we be doing things for mobile? Yes, we should. Oh my God, everybody's going to mobile. And the way we still look at it is we still think we're in the content business and that mobile is a way to deliver content. It's just another delivery mechanism. And I'm thinking now not so much so. And I was inspired in that thought when Mark Zuckerberg said to the New York Times about a month ago that he was breaking up the big blue app of Facebook into little bits. And I realized what Google does, of course, is that Google has an underlying relationship with me. It knows things about me. And as a result, it gives me relevance across many platforms. But I don't go to some big Google app, some big Google portal, right? I go to Maps when I want to get somewhere, email when I want to communicate, Google Plus, yes I do, when I want to take photos, and so on and so forth. So it occurred to me that what that is an incredible generator of context. Mobile's about context. It's telling, your use of this phone tells the person you're interacting with, the organization you're interacting with, what you want to do right now. That's where the value of mobile is. It's not just a distribution platform. So if I break up news, for example, maybe I want to get just the latest right now. Maybe I want to get filled in. Maybe I've got 20 minutes on the bank line and I want to read something. Maybe I want to connect with my community. These are all things that we in media can have a role in doing, but not thinking monolithically that what we're going to do is take the product we already make and shovel it onto this thing. No, this is a mechanism to know people. Google sees that. That's why Google's in the phone business, I would argue, is because this is a signal generator about people. All right. Next, relationship with an ecosystem. Now, you already exist, as Sir Martin said, in a competitive landscape with other big broadcasters. And Martin thinks in big terms, and so he's talking about consolidation. I think you also exist with endless little guys. And that's where the action is. You live in an ecosystem. I'm doing a lot of work in the media ecosystem of New Jersey, tying together the big site owned by the big newspaper, or formerly big newspaper, down to the littlest blog who just serves moms in Montclair, New Jersey. And we're tying these people together using software called Repost.us that makes articles embeddable like YouTube videos. They travel with brand, revenue, analytic, and links. It enables these sites to share content, but what they're really sharing is audience. And next, I'm going to put an ad network on top of this, by God, and they're going to share revenue. And there's ways that the big vertically integrated media company cannot be big anymore. It doesn't do everything anymore. What you have to do is specialize. My most retweeted line I've ever uttered in life is do what you do best and link to the rest. The miraculous invention of Sir Tim Berners-Lee in the link, the creation of the commercial web, which will be 20 years old October this year, what it really enables is specialization. So you do what you do best. If you are the 10th best at doing something, don't bother because you're about to go off the search screen. You have to be the first, second, or maybe third best at what you do. And there's somebody else who's going to be best at something else. But if you're the best, you will get links. And if you complement what you do, you give links. And that's a very important thing. So this means that you have to become collaborators in an ecosystem world. You cannot operate monolithically anymore. You must find collaborators and work with them because you can't afford to be everything. Your money is going to, even though you have this magnificent cushion of taxes or whatever you guys call it, it's gonna be challenged. And you're gonna have to be more efficient because all media are more efficient. All media are more efficient, and you must become more efficient too. And one way to become more efficient is to collaborate, and one way is to specialize. And the link is what enables that. Now, I would argue that one role for you, I went to a session at Ditchley a couple years ago, and there was a lot of discussion about the BBC there and what its role is with other media, and there were newspapers there wanting to grab part of the license fee to try to support newspapers, and I think that was all headed down the wrong path, down a rabbit hole of trying to share some tax money, fee money, excuse me. What I thought at the time the BBC ought to be doing, what I think you all should be doing, is to become platforms for media creation and communities in your places. Open platforms, generous, open platforms for the creation of creativity, for communities to interact and share, for new businesses to be created. You have a lot of assets. Before I listed the skills that you have, but you also have assets, right? You have the power to convene and promote what's good. I would argue that rather than competing with legacy commercial media, you should be helping to support it by pointing your audience at the best of it, not the worst of it. And I know well in Europe that you're under a lot of pressure from legacy media companies. I hear complaints in both the UK, where I work a lot, and in Germany, where I work a lot, that you're unfairly competing with us on this digital arena. Well, I would say it's the opposite. If you don't become fully digital first, which I'll define in a minute, then you're not using your tax dollars well. You're not serving your publics well. You're not doing your job well. But rather than competing with the legacy players as they also try to become digital, you're a non-market influence. And yes, you can be dangerous to them. So the way to be a friendly force, I think, is to support them in various ways. To promote the best of their work, to curate the best of their work, to send them audience. You're also the ones who can afford to innovate. You can afford, I know this is antithetical being government-like bodies, that you perhaps feel allergic to risk. But logically, you are the best position to take risks and to experiment and to learn and to then share the results openly. to create platforms that others can use for creation, for distribution, for discovery, new forms, all kinds of things. So that's my highest dream for all of you, is to be that. Platforms, tools, training, promotion, technology, and also sharing your content openly. The people have already paid for it. Let the people remix it. Let them find what's good in it. Let them make new shows out of it. They will surprise you with the gems that exist there. Maybe not for the audience of the entire nation, but for the audience of their own community. So think about how television and radio, how what we used to call broadcast, can become a platform. And it's a platform for multiple things. Again, creativity, communication, connectivity, even new businesses. So how could you be an incubator? An incubator for new businesses. And when I say business, I mean business. Whatever the head shaking was going on before with Sir Martin, I do think you need to be tied to the market in some way or another, even if that's just helping new entrants figure out how to start. So how are you an open laboratory? How are you an incubator? How are you a platform? There's slight differences among those definitions, but I think they all matter. Now I want to come back to this idea of digital first. I hear that around your world now. I hear that in the newspaper world a lot. The New York Times, as many of you know, just had a big survey, a big leaked report coming out arguing they should be digital first. I work with a company called Digital First Media, run by John Payton in the US, who is a brilliant innovator in the dinosaur field of newspapers. And when he named the company Digital First, a young entrepreneur named Rafat Ali publicly mocked him on Twitter and said, well, what a ridiculous name. And Payton said, yeah, you're right, it is ridiculous. There'd never be a meeting at Google or at Business Insider about being digital first, because they are digital. But he said, Rafat, my company isn't digital. I have to make it digital. I have to get it over that. Alan Rusbridger at The Guardian, full disclosure with whom I also work, was famous for, among many things, but he did a PowerPoint chart some years ago where he drew one line down, which was the fate of print, and one line up, which was digital, but there was a gap in between. He put a big green blob there. That's the blob of uncertainty we have to get over. So Payton is trying to move his company to digital first. And he did a few things. When he took over one of the parts of the companies, he gave, and this is to give you an idea how long ago this was, he gave everyone in the company, commercial and editorial, flip cameras, because it made them all think video. And indeed, one of the first outcomes of this was that there was a lot more video advertising on his websites, because his salespeople were suddenly thinking about video. He changed the commission structure for salespeople, that if they made their, they had to make their digital bonus to get any bonus. If they made their print target but not their digital target, they got no bonus. They only got either or both bonuses if they made their digital target. That drives the sales force, and that drives the advertisers to online. Now, most important is trying to change the culture. Evidently, that's what I'm talking about, is culture. So how do you change the culture of a stodgy organization like a newsroom? Well, here's the key to it. You've got to make the old product the byproduct. I'm sorry that sounds so tweetable. I don't mean it to be. But as long as the legacy product is the core of what you do, you're doomed to stay there and not change. If we agree that digital is the future, connectivity is the future, the audience are getting older, then we've got to drive every one of our constituents to a digital future. And again, I know that's controversial for you because your competitors will resent you for that, but I go back to my prior point, not if you're friendly and collaborative with them. You too have to become digital first. So what that means, I think, is that your product, your shows, your channels become a byproduct. Your primary product is online. I went down and met with the folks at Fusion, which is a joint venture of Univision and ABC in the US, and very, very, very bright people there, but they're making their primary product the channel, the linear channel, and they'll use digital to try to drive millennials there. I predicted it's going to be the opposite. Their primary product is going to be digital, and they will use the channel for the few millennials who watch it to promote the digital product. Jigar, who you'll hear from next with your wonderful Post-its, is working. Am I allowed to say where you're helping out now? He's working with somebody who's also doing something like this. So there's a few efforts in the US out of big broadcast entities to try to, is that okay? To try to start new digital platforms. But within those organizations, there's a huge fight going on, just as in newspapers, about what leads, what are we really? As long as you say you're really a broadcaster, then you're in the past. Full stop. You've got to figure out what the future is. So let me talk about, finally, new forms. I went to a meeting that the Knight Foundation held a few weeks ago. The Knight Foundation is my first funder, and so that's the ones who are having the meeting tomorrow in New York that I had to go get back to quickly. So they held a meeting about kind of wither public television in the US. And they brought in a bunch of millennials plus gray-haired me, and they talked about this. And a few things came out of this. Knight wanted to see about saving PBS, but frankly, the entire audience said, why? Why bother? It's irrelevant to them. Now, that may seem like a crime and a shame, and PBS is very different from you, but it was an honest response, and you should be sobered by it, I think. It's not relevant to them at all. They're living an entirely different media life. The second thing that came out of the meeting for me that I think should be sobering for you was that that thing is not the first screen. That is the second screen. This is the first screen. That was just as clear as a bell. My primary focus is here. Oh, yeah, the TV's on. Now, it's the opposite of the way we've been thinking. Oh, good, we can support watching TV by having people do stuff and interact with us here. Stop thinking that you're just a content maker and a content producer. And if that's all you're doing is making content and you want to get people to interact with that, that's terribly egotistical. But enough about you. What do you think about the stuff I gave you? Right? That's the problem here. Whereas if you think as a platform for communities, public interest broadcasters by definition must be exactly that. Platforms for communities. But what you have to do, what I'm trying to do in my new social journalism degree, is to figure out how we go to the community first and hear and discern what the community needs. Another thing. Big difference in form. I had coffee with Katie Couric, who's gone from broadcast to Yahoo, because I tweeted about this happening. She said, oh, let's have coffee and talk about this. So as I went there and thought about what I thought what the difference for her was, because she said, listen, I've been doing this my whole career, and now she's going to Yahoo and trying to figure out what it is there. I said, I think here's the biggest difference for you, is that you no longer have to fill a clock. Filling a clock is what has led to the disease of MH370 on CNN. At the same time, we have the old mass media metrics. We took reach and frequency into online as unique users and page views, which is, again, enough about you. What do you think about my stuff? Did you pay attention to my stuff? I made some stuff for you. Come look at my stuff. As opposed to thinking about a community, as opposed to thinking about the idea of an asset that has growing value over time. So the opportunity you have online is to create assets that are not gone in the ether like broadcast is. They can gain audience, gain value, gain links, gain credibility, gain trust over time. They are assets. That's fundamentally different. So when you make a backgrounder on a complicated story, that can live for a year until you have to update it again. When you do something about what's new in a news event, you don't have to update it until you actually know something new the next time, unlike CNN. I turned on CNN for the first time in weeks when I was here in Europe. What was the first story I see? MH370. So thinking about assets. Now, when you have the assets, these assets just live on the net, of course, with addresses all over. And one way to find them is Google. Another way to find them is social. Another way to find them is for you to curate paths to them. Right? So we take the old inverted pyramid in my field of news, and it was what's new, and then what's the story really about, and then what's the background, and a quote, and example, and so on and so forth. So I say to students now, the background paragraph is useless, because if you don't know the story, you're not going to learn Syria in one paragraph. If you do know the story, it's a waste of your eye space and time to get over it. And I say to students, what should it be now? And they say, of course, a link. And I say, a link to what? And they say, Wikipedia. So Vox Media came along and said, aha, there's an opportunity. We can create an entire company that specializes not in a beat, but in a type of content, the explainer. That's an opportunity all of you have as well, is to say, what do you do well? You can create new entities in that, or you can support entrepreneurial ventures that do that. All right, three last things. I lied. I know one of the things you're going to say back to me in any of this is, uh-oh, copyright. And I understand that and I agree. But I've been doing some work with the World Economic Forum. They're doing some very good research on trying to get past copyright. And my construct of this is to think of credit right, to think that credit should attach to content and creation as it goes around this digital world, so that you can then have a panoply of business models. I know a lot of singers, for example, who just want their songs to be heard so people will buy tickets. I know other singers who want what they want in return from distribution platforms is data about their fans so they can know what the fans want. These are exchanges of value that copyright does not support, because copyright, a Gutenberg invention in essence, says you own it and people sell it. Well, that doesn't work anymore. So we've got to have a more flexible structure. So I think you've got to be part of the innovators in rethinking this. And the content that you yourself do, quote, own, rethink what that means. Open that up, free that up so that people can remake and remix. And yes, you have a right to ask for credit along the way, or attribution, or the caveat that we didn't make this, whatever it is you want. But open it up. All right, one thing too is I think that we make a lot of presumptions about things like in form, like length. Uh-oh, people have no attention span anymore. Everything has to become short. 6-second videos. True, that's part of the world. But on the other hand, this afternoon I'm going to miss the show that I'm on every week, a podcast called This Week in Google, which Amy mentioned. Leo Laporte, who was an old broadcaster, started this podcast company called Twit, This Week in Tech. It has about 20 shows. Leo's very open about this. He got about $8 million revenue last year. It's a nice little business. It really works well. And I go on with Leo and my co-host Gina Trapani from Skype every week on Wednesday afternoon, and we talk about just Google on the cloud, for as long as an hour and a half. For most of you, that would be stultifyingly boring. But for an audience of anywhere between, for Leo's shows, 50,000 and 250,000 a week, very, very, very loyal audience. They want to get in depth. So TV can be really short. TV can also be really long. My last point, and then I want to spend a few minutes, I hope, having a conversation. I went on too long, is we're going to have an event at CUNY in the fall at my university, the Graduate School of Journalism, in reinventing TV news. It's just news, not entertainment. But any of you who are interested in participating in this, what I want to do with this event is to blow people's brains up with what's possible, to rethink every kind of form that there is, right? And I want to take Tim Pool and I want him to describe that vision of social TV and what does it really look like, and to make that. I want to take somebody who can take the idea of summary and rather than wasting 22 minutes of my time summarizing the world, see if they can do it really well in 3 minutes. Because why waste my time anymore in that sense? And of course I speak in commercial terms of 22 minutes per half hour. I want somebody to reinvent. In the US, we are obsessed with weather in ridiculous ways. Reinvent weather. I want to get rid of, in news, the ridiculously stupid live shot stand-up. It is the stupidest, most wasteful convention of orthodoxy in television news, and I hate it. Stand-up, or in the case of the BBC, the walk-up. They're walking up to the thing, and now we have, right, I've been watching the BBC this week. Right? The most ludicrous example we've had that in the US lately is, you may have heard about a controversy we had with Governor Christie in my state of New Jersey, home of the Sopranos, when someone in his administration shut lanes of the George Washington Bridge. So what do you see? Both national and local, you see correspondents, reporters standing up in front of the George Washington Bridge. There's no officials there. There's no sources there. There's no victims there. There's no fucking journalism there. It's show. It's making the world into a backdrop. That's show business, folks. That's not journalism. And it wastes resources. We've spent precious journalistic resources on this stupid idea of we have to have video. No, you don't. There's no have to anymore in television. Right? The only have to anymore in television and radio is to rethink what it is and to do so bravely. So that's what I wanted to say, and I'm eager to hear you argue with me. Tell me where I'm wrong, or more importantly, I would love to hear some of the ideas that you've had for blowing up brains about how to rethink TV. So, to discuss.